now moving on to our first question. This is for Dr. Brothers to kick us off. How is midlife different from other life stages? And why should we be thinking about aging in our 40s and 50s?
Thank you for that question. I could probably talk for a whole hour, so cut me off if I get a little too excited and keep going for too long. I'll just kind of give a brief overview about midlife and some of the research that's going on in that area. And you may be surprised to know that people are researching midlife as a period of life, but it's true. And as people are living longer and longer, we're recognizing more, and rightfully so, that this period of 40s and 50s really is its own distinct developmental period with its own challenges, strengths, and considerations. And some researchers say it's a pivotal moment in life. It's a really important period of our lives. And I'll kind of give you an overview about some of the key research findings in this area. So first of all, when is midlife? There's lots of different, you could probably ask 10 different people and get 10 different answers, but largely, especially for this call, we'll think about it as in the 40s and 50s. So 40 to 59 is a pretty commonly agreed upon period for midlife. Some of the key aspects of this time, and all of us out there in our 40s and 50s can come up with a list longer than this, but it's a time of competing and demanding social roles. A lot of times people are at the peak roles within their families, within their communities, within their workforce, their job, and are having lots of competing roles at the same time. So not surprisingly, it is a time of stress and responsibility for many people. There's a lot of individual differences. So someone who had their kids in their 20s is going to look a lot, their 40s and 50s is going to look a lot different than someone who had kids when they were 40, or someone who chose not to have children or does not have children. Individual differences, just kind of recognizing that huge amount of diversity that we all bring to where we are, wherever we are in the lifespan developmental process. There may be some emerging signs of physical aging, maybe cognitive aging, as people enter their 40s and 50s. And this is a time when lifestyle behaviors can start to catch up with people. The cumulative effects may be showing up. People may be taking on caregiving responsibilities for older family members. There's financial strain and stressors and responsibilities, some certainly increase in mental health issues sometimes that we see, and we'll talk about that more throughout the day. So there's a research data set out of the University of Wisconsin called MIDUS, M-I-D-U-S, Midlife in the United States. And this is a longitudinal research study that's been going on since the 90s, and people are surveyed every 10 years. And it's really trying to understand health and wellness on a broad scale of different things. And so that's where a lot of the data come from for what we know about midlife development. And I thought I would just throw out a few of the key findings that have come out, because I think they're pretty interesting. So when you ask people what age they wish they could be, a lot of people don't say midlife. That's not the most popular age that people think that they might want to be. However, there are also a lot of assets to this time as well. So midlife is a time for mitigating risk factors and promoting protective factors. And so if we're thinking about a lot of the research in the in developmental world talks about resilience building. And so we can think about this period of life as a time of being intentional and aging in an intentional way, and thinking about what risk factors are there that might interfere with my ability to age in a healthy way, and which protective factors might I be able to enhance? What do I have control over? So some of the most significant risk factors that have come out of the research are not surprising, but they bear repeating. Smoking, obesity, and loneliness are the three big contributors to the worst later life outcomes that people have some control over in midlife. Protective factors that are particularly important are engagement in life, and that can be customized and individualized however you like that, exercise, social support, and positive beliefs. And one example of positive beliefs is finding some aspect of control. So midlife is an interesting time because there tend to be some physical changes and declines. And when we experience that. And I'm just going to give a simple example that we'll all experience if we have not yet is declining eyesight right around age 40. So when you start to need readers to read that menu at a restaurant, that is a normative physical development that tends to happen. And I think it's interesting to think about how you responded or how you might respond, and using that as a model of adapting to change. Right, it's something that we have a pretty easy fix, but it's also a change that people may struggle with quite a bit because it signals a loss, and something that that signals a loss of control. And it turns out that control beliefs, feeling a sense of being in control, are particularly important for well-being all throughout the rest of the lifespan. And so, finding some reasonable way to maintain control and a sense of control is um, one of those attitudes about life and about aging that we know from the research that actually tend to be very important. So just kind of putting that out there, finding control, even when you feel like you might be having a loss of control, turns out to be really important. And then I'll end on a maybe crushing some belief that you already have about midlife, but the midlife crisis is not actually supported by research. Turns out, if you're expecting to have a midlife crisis, you may not, and you don't have to buy into that. It's something that has been popularized and that a lot of people throw out as a common term, but it's not something that we see supported by research. However, we do see that midlife tends to be a time for reflection and evaluation. Where am I in my life? What have I accomplished? What goals did I always want to accomplish? What new goals might serve me well? So um, that certainly self-reflection, but maybe not the midlife crisis in red sports car that that maybe you all were thinking about. So maybe I will just end with a quote from the researchers. Midlife is situated at the crossroads of growth and decline. So it's a time where there are increasing declines and losses, but it's not this kind of like over the hill peak that we see on greeting cards. That's really actually dangerous to age stereotypes and can perpetuate some really negative beliefs. It's not this peak that suddenly we come down from and everything's downhill after that. There certainly are a lot of gains that we see from the developmental literature, things getting better as far as social relationships, emotion regulation, expertise, and things like that. So, all right. Well, I'm happy to provide any more information about anything that I've mentioned, but hopefully that sets the stage for our conversation.
That was a great introduction. Thank you, Dr. Brothers. Next question is a two-part question. It says, are there any supplements or vitamins that have been shown to boost longevity? Is there an anti-aging product that exists now that we should implement into our diets or routines?
That one's for me here in food science, human nutrition. So first, I want to state that I am not a dietitian, so I'm not going to lean in that way of trying to advise on particular things to take. I do teach human nutrition, however, and one thing you see within the classrooms is that there are different trends. Like every semester, someone's talking about coconut oil or ackee berry or something like that. So things are phasing in and out, and they're constantly doing so. So how do you figure out what you should take so that you could have longer lifespan, basically? And I saw some questions here specific to their studies that suggest that you can take specific supplements, at least in rodents, because they have shorter lifespans, and you can see their lifespans increase, for example. But what I like to tell my students is it's a mixture of all these holistic things that you basically have in your life. So the first speaker already mentioned that when you are in your 40s and 50s, that some of your life choices are beginning to catch up with you. And that's true. And now we have to figure out, how do we slow those down, or how do we reverse them? And what I try to tell my students is a balance. It's a balance between making sure that you get your appropriate amount of exercise, but also a balance between the nutrition you're taking in. And based on the literature, if you were to have to focus on one or the other, nutrition, especially as you're aging, is particularly important. So you hear the phrase that you are basically what you eat, and many of the experiments that I do, because I'm a basic researcher, so we'll utilize rodents to see, where does metabolic disease start, what causes it to spread to other organs, what happens on that very cellular level with our cells. And what you'll find is that whatever diet that we are feeding those animals, and so one of the studies in particular that we did because I see a mention of omegas, for example. We did looking at just fats. We were looking at saturated fats versus those unsaturated fats, like omegas, for example. And are these things really healthy for you if you implement them in your diet? And so what we found is that with these different fats, if you looked at those animals at the cellular level, that's exactly what their cells were made of, exactly what you were feeding them. So you are 100% what you eat. So an example, again, if you're thinking of just saturated fats, which are delicious, it's like butter. They are going to be solid at room temperature versus those unsaturated fats are going to be liquid at room temperature. They're going to do the same things in your cells. So if you have the saturated fats, they're going to just tend to stick tight like bricks next to one another, versus the unsaturated fats are going to branch out more and they're going to give more fluidity to your cells. So what does this all come down to? We're talking about what are these supplements or vitamins? And what I would honestly recommend is that if there is a vitamin that you know you're deficient in, that you try to find it in a fruit or a vegetable form before you go to supplements. That fruit or vegetable form has everything that you need in it, down to the fiber that you may need in it, down to the other vitamins or minerals that work well with it. A colorful plate is always a really good idea. And I know maybe sometimes it's not what you want to eat, but once you get used to that lifestyle and pattern, that it brings up your energy. In the end, there are studies to suggest where they're looking at Western diet, which is what Americans eat, versus the Mediterranean diet, for example, where they're more of the fruits and vegetables, more of the olive oils. And those people are living longer. They have more longevity, not because of the supplements or vitamins that they're taking in, but the food choices that they make. And I don't think that it's ever too late to choose your next way of eating in your life, but also implementing some exercise. So no, so I can't give necessarily supplements or vitamin advice unless your doctor says that you're completely deficient in some. My advice would be shop mainly in that produce section and eat your very lean meats and do at least your minimal 30 minutes of exercise.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Foster.
Mm-hmm.
Next question says, I am an adventurous person who loves to mountain bike, hike, ski, etc. But I'm noticing that as I get older, I have more pain when I do these things, and I am becoming hesitant because I don't want to hurt myself. Do you have any advice?
And so for that question, reading it previously, there was a couple questions that came to my mind. I think the first and foremost is when you are experiencing pain from these activities. If you're experiencing this pain while actually engaging in the activities, I think that would be different from experiencing the pain after completing those activities. If you're experiencing the pain while you're engaged in these activities, I think it would be a really, really good idea to check in with your doctor, maybe even seek out a referral to a physical therapist, just to see if maybe there isn't something going on that should be addressed, whether that is strength discrepancies within muscles that can cause a lot of pain if you're starting to maybe activate these muscles that are already used a lot, but maybe perhaps too much. If the pain is coming after those activities are done, that can also be one of two things. I would say hopefully the thing that you are hoping for is what we commonly refer to as DOMS, D-O-M-S, which is just delayed onset of muscle soreness. And everybody feels this whenever you do something that is out of the ordinary. So if you are not used to toting a wheelbarrow around, but for some reason you have this new project around the home, you might notice the next day or two, you're gonna be really, really sore. Does that mean that you should avoid ever, doing wheelbarrow activities? Not necessarily. It's just that you brought your muscles and your joints to a level that is higher than they are normally used to. So the reason why you may be experiencing these pains now rather than when you're younger per se is unfortunately, with the aging process, we do know that there is a decline in things like muscle and bone tissue. So these, even though they were very comfortable for you before, may start becoming activities that are a little bit more stressful than they used to be. So with that in mind, I would strongly encourage a couple different things here. If these are activities that you do not engage in on a regular basis, like you do not go mountain biking or hiking or skiing every single week, but maybe every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, what I would definitely recommend is trying to increase either the duration or intensity of your normal exercise routine. Because if these are just coming out of nowhere and your body's just not used to this surprise or this shock that the level of stress that these activities can bring, then that would make sense to me that you might actually be incurring more pain from these stressors or these shockers. So if you can increase your daily activities to not necessarily be the same as mountain biking or skiing, but perhaps maybe once every week or twice every week, incorporating something that is either of longer duration, which I may think of why hiking might be painful. If it's a difficult course, that too, but the extended duration might be the problem. So maybe once a week, just go for a very long walk. It doesn't have to be a hike, but just something to where your legs are now saying, oh, this is what it feels like to walk for 2 hours straight or 3 hours straight. And then when it comes to mountain biking or skiing, perhaps increasing the intensity of some of your activities during the regular week. That is, again, introducing your body saying, oh, this is what it feels like to perform at a higher level. If this is what you're already doing and you're still experiencing pain from those activities, as much as I hate to say it, especially from somebody who loves to do these same things, I would hate to hear this advice, but you may want to consider decreasing either the duration or intensity of those activities just to see if that doesn't help in reducing pain. So for instance, if you go hiking and the next day you're really, really sore, not just your typical DOMS, but maybe something a little bit more severe than that, well, you may want to just kind of recheck to see what your limitations are now. So you may want to just go for an hour hike one week. And even though that's way less than what you're typically used to, it at least sets a benchmark to say whether or not that 1 hour is acceptable for not promoting pain later on. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting question to tackle. And I hope that I got enough kind of comprehensive there to maybe tackle some of the issues you might be dealing with. But yeah, I think that's about as comprehensively as I can answer it at this moment, though.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Perry. Next one says, again, relevant. I have noticed that as I age, my friends don't always want to do active, outdoorsy things with me. So I have begun to seek friendships with people younger than myself. Can you talk about the benefits of intergenerational friendships?
I almost wonder if this is the same person as the last question, but it's a really great question. So intergenerational relationships are those in which you become friends with people who are of different age groups than yourself. So if you're a younger adult, middle-aged adult, you may be friends with older adults or someone younger than yourself. And there's a lot of research that shows that these are really great relationships. If you have close intergenerational relationships and ties, this has been associated with less depression, better physical health, and also greater life satisfaction. And it's really interesting because these kinds of relationships can, contribute to your life in different ways. So for example, if you're friends with people who are younger than you, this can contribute to greater purpose and meaning in life. You can share your wisdom and life experiences. I started playing volleyball recently, so I'm in my 30s. I started playing recently. Unlike the advice that we've been given so far, I didn't really start exercising until about a few years ago. And so I'm starting to learn how to play this sport, but I'm also fascinated by the people in their 50s and 60s who are teaching me all kinds of things about how to play this sport, and they're adapting in different ways. They may not be as fast, but they certainly have adapted so that they have like more skillful shots, better serve shots. And that has been really helpful for me too. And so these kinds of relationships are interesting because in addition, they can help buffer against what we see in terms of age normative declines in our social relationships. And in particular, as we age, we have something called a social convoy. It's means that we kind of travel with the same group of people as we get older. Maybe it's our spouse and our partner, our family, and really close ties. And we call that our convoy, and they come with us. And so it's a small circle that we travel with. But as we age, things can happen. People move, people succumb to illness, and so our networks can shrink, and this can become a problem. So it's important to replenish our social networks by making sure that we make friends with new people. And so there's this myth that, you know, people you get the most relationships when you have supportive ties, and that part is true. But it's this idea that you should just be taking from your relationships. And intergenerational relationships are nice because there's a give and take, that you can contribute and still be a productive member in your social networks. And one last point I'll add is, this wasn't part of the question, but what's really interesting about this question and how this person feels adventurous and wants to be friends with younger people is there's idea about what is mental age. So how old do we actually feel? And if that doesn't quite match up with our chronological age, this can be very interesting. So if you feel younger than you actually are, whether it's that you physically feel younger or maybe psychologically you feel younger, this has been associated with positive outcomes for people. People can be healthier, and we see better longer term outcomes for those individuals too. And I know Dr. Brothers has done some work on these different views and perceptions of aging. So I'm sure she can also share on some of that research as well. Great question.
Thanks, Dr. Long. Yeah, I think those are all really important points. And the only thing that I would add is just the importance of intergenerational relationships for offsetting negative age stereotypes and helping people to continue to feel younger too. And there are some certainly great benefits to that. And so what I mean by that is, if you would go into a card store and look for birthday cards, you might think that aging only involves losing your memory and having certain body parts sag and all these horrible things. And of course, they are not showing the whole picture of what it means to grow older. So if you don't have meaningful relationships with people who are older than you, who might be able to show you what aging can be, and that it's not that really one-dimensional greeting card image, but that there really is a lot more to it, and have some role models for what it means to adapt and find meaning in life, then I think that can be really, really important.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is also for you, Dr. Brothers. It says, I am a middle-aged adult who is considering a career change, but I don't know if I have the energy to start over like I did when I was young, and there's a financial risk involved. Do you have any positive research or testimonies about people in encore careers?
Yeah, such a neat question. And what I love about this is just the opportunity to talk about changing and taking on something new and learning throughout the entire adult lifespan. So I think that one of the things that, if I had to guess, one of the things that might be concerning or making this person a little bit fearful is the rampant age discrimination that actually is out there in hiring practices all across the world. And I wish it wasn't that way, but it certainly is. And whether people know it or not. So a lot of times these are implicit biases, but there are so many assumptions about older workers that really research has debunked most of them. And so there are some really great initiatives in place to try and train employers to be more age friendly and to consider hiring older workers to supplement their workforce. Lots of benefits to employers for doing this by also increasing those intergenerational relationships in the workforce, having some more historical knowledge if they can hold on to older workers, which is a little bit different of a topic than what we're talking about here. But a lot of initiatives going on for age-friendly workplaces, including one out of our local area here in Northern Colorado. The Partnership for Age-Friendly Communities has a task force that's looking at this exact issue. I'll also mention the Bell Policy Institute out of Denver has done a lot of work in this area, trying to change policy on a state level as well, as far as discrimination goes. But then getting to the rest of the question, is there kind of positive research and testimonies? Absolutely. People do this, and thank goodness they do, right? So maybe someone's in a career that a parent or a teacher had just expected them to be in, and they follow what was expected of them. Michelle Obama, in her recent memoir a couple of years ago had a really neat story about how she just was supposed to be a lawyer, and that's what she did. And then she came out of law school and was like, I don't think this is what I want to do, after all of that time of accruing debt and investing a lot of hard work. And so I think the importance of doing that deep reflection of what brings you meaning and what brings you joy, what skills. I think in midlife too, you can do a lot better of a evaluation of what your skills and your interests actually are. And so I think if you can find options that actually do bring you energy, I think that would be a good sign. So rather than feeling like you maybe don't have the energy to start over, if you found a career path that was exciting and really a good fit, then that might help with the energy of tackling it. There are some really great, there is actually a website called encore.org talking about this exact issue. So there's a lot of resources out there, and I would just say go for it. And lives are too long these days to stay in a job that is not fulfilling and is not something that you want to be doing. So if you can make the change, I would say absolutely go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Brothers. So the next question, we'll say this is for all panelists, anybody that has something to add. It says, I am on the brink of menopause and I don't want to use any hormonal medications to help me get through this period. Do you have any tips to reduce the symptoms of menopause?
So I just unmuted my mic simply because when we were giving these questions, I was listed and just with other panels to come in. So I'm not like trying to spearhead this, like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this among all the other panelists, but I will be rather quick. I'm just going to focus on the exercise capacity and how this actually may help with symptoms of menopause. But since this is something that affects basically every single aspect of life, I'm sure we have other contributions from other panelists, so I will try to be somewhat succinct. And to start this conversation off, I'm actually going to be sharing a link for a study down in the chat. So if you go to the chat, you'll see that, and it's a link to a study called Exercise Beyond Menopause, Do's and Don'ts. It's a little bit dated. It came out in 2011, but I really, really like this study just because it does not read like your typical scientific study. This really is almost like something that you would pull out of a magazine article as far as the way that you would read it. It's very, very user-friendly. But beyond that, I really do like it because, as the title suggests, it definitely does bring up a lot of the good things that exercise has to contribute towards symptoms of menopause. But in all fairness, there are some things that you need to be aware of as well when it comes to exercise during this time of life. So it addresses those as well. But beyond the scope of menopause, there's actually another pretty lengthy section in there, which actually talks about general recommendations for exercise. And this is for not just women going through menopause, but also just a general population. So check the study out. If this is something that you're really interested in or know somebody that's really interested in, I think this is a good study to share. And just because I'm a sucker for good quotes, there is a quote in there, and I'll just read it off real quick. It says, despite all the physiological changes, menopause should not be viewed as a sign of impending decline, but rather a wonderful beginning of a good health program, including lifestyle changes. So I really like that in there. But yeah, as far as exercise goes, I will have to say that just to kind of restate what the title is saying, there's a good side, there's a bad side, and as it comes to many topics of literature or science, exercise literature with menopause has a lot of, we'll say, flexibility. So there are a lot of tremendously good studies that show that exercise actually helps to reduce some symptoms of menopause. And there are some studies that show that certain types of exercise can even exacerbate or make certain symptoms worse. So this is definitely something where, because it is so variable per person, you may want to encroach on these guidelines with some curiosity, hopefully, but also with some hesitation. Just start off slow, see how your body reacts, and go from there. But I think the major thing that you'll see in the literature is about hot flashes or hot flushes, depending on your nation of origin. And here again, we've seen certain exercise modalities, I would say high intensity, which you'll hear me say throughout this presentation, High intensity has been shown to be good and bad. I would say where we do not want you to do high intensity exercise is when you're already having difficulties with sleep, which is going to be weird because later I'm going to bring up how high intensity exercise actually helps with sleep. But in this given context of menopause, you do want to be careful because with high intensity, that is going to be very stressful to your body, and you're going to have that stress response as your body goes through the repair from that exercise. And if you're not getting good sleep, then this can exacerbate that stress response. So that would be the one big highlight I would say to be aware of is high intensity in a lot of cases is good. And I really appreciate what Hannah said at the very beginning of this. Please do not take this as medical recommendations. Please check in with your doctor first. But if you can safely engage in high intensity exercise under the proper conditions, such as sleeping well, good nutrition, good rest, low stress levels in the first place, it's actually a really good thing to get into. Not only because we're looking at its effect on hot flashes, but of course, the other big thing that we need to keep aware of is bone mineral density throughout this period of life as well. And high intensity exercise is good for not only building muscle, which I'll talk about later, but also for increasing bone mineral density. And besides that, when we talk about symptoms, there's, hundreds of symptoms we can talk about, but just to speak generally, if we're looking at more of the emotional or maybe just particularly a mental health aspect with dealing with anxiety, stress, or depression, we understand that a lot of those things are, I'm not going to say all the time helped, but can be helped through exercise. And there's another interesting study that got pulled up where there's a really, really high correlation between your lipid profile, cholesterol levels, and something called apolipoprotein B with hot flashes. And with all those three things I just listed off, we know that exercise helps to regulate those as well. The one thing I'll lead off and then turn it over to other panelists is just to reiterate that exercise is not a one fit all for everybody. Even if everybody engages in exercise, not everybody's going to see changes in symptoms. There's another really good study that came out. It was obviously only women going through menopause. Not all of them were symptomatic, some were asymptomatic, but they were putting them all through a 1-year training program. And at the very beginning of it, the group that was going to be trained, only 50% of those women were experiencing symptoms of menopause. And then the group that was not trained, 59% of those women were experiencing symptoms of menopause. After the year, the exercise group went from 50% down to 37%. And then the non-exercise group actually went from 59% up to 68% as far as those experiencing symptoms of menopause. So there's really a lot of different ways that you can look at this. It's, well, of all the women who were symptomatic, only roughly 13% saw a reduction in those symptoms. But hopefully that's one of you. If you are a part of that 13 percentile that can get in there, that's great. Then the opposite side of the coin is, of course, those who did not exercise. Not all of them, but a good percentage of them saw an increase in symptoms of menopause. So again, just real quick, I'm not going to sit here and say that exercise is great all the time for all the people, but I think it is one of the key pieces in the puzzle that you could use as an alternate form if you're trying to stay away from hormone replacement therapy.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. I can piggyback off of that as well. So it's two sides to the equation, one of them being exercise, but if you're not fueling your body correctly, that might be an outcome of why particular exercises may or may not work for an individual. So if you're thinking of what to include and what to cut out of your diet, the easy things to cut out are going to be, again, those saturated fats. It doesn't matter at what part you are in your lifespan, decreasing those saturated fats, the refined sugars, the cracker aisle, the snack aisle, those things don't have all the nutrients that your body needs. They're delicious, but you shouldn't be getting your fiber from like a Fiber One bar or a cookie. You should be getting it from something that's in the produce section. So some examples of what you should be taking in, as well as your exercise, if you want to control some of the symptoms of menopause, are going to be things like salmon, because salmon is going to have that vitamin D and the omega-3s that your body needs. So those omega-3s are going to be the great fats. I don't get enough salmon, so I take my omegas through a supplement, but I do love salmon as well. It's also said to help reduce night sweats and the association with breast cancer risk as well. So salmon is a great meat to eat. Broccoli, because it's going to have that calcium and that fiber. So Dr. Perry had talked a little bit about bones, and we want to make sure that if we're going to be doing that exercise and we want to have that longevity and what we call health span, basically, that you want to have healthy bones as well. So you want to eat foods that complement that. Again, that's broccoli with calcium in it, but also fiber, which is great for your digestive tract as well. Eggs are a great thing because eggs are going to have vitamin D, which is a nutrient that is proposed to be something that women lack. Eggs are also great with all of our essential amino acids. Our amino acids are building blocks of our all of our tissues basically in our body. So you want to make sure that you, not a whole lot of eggs, but enough, because you don't want to go to having cholesterol risk with that. Berries, very, very colorful berries are going to be great because these berries have wonderful phytochemicals in them, antioxidants. So what they're going to do is they're going to help fight the increase in fat storage. They're going to help to reduce inflammation within our tissues and immune responses that might be maladaptive. They're going to reduce your risk for heart disease as well. Another thing is going to be whole grains. So this is going to loop right back around to those fibers, the good carbohydrates, not having a huge spike in insulin when you're eating. It's also going to help with satiety. So this is going to help with menopause too. Yogurt, and this is going to circle right back again to our calcium and our vitamin D. So we want those healthy bones, as well as the probiotics in yogurt to keep our digestive tract happy as we're going through menopause too. Leafy greens, those are just going to be associated with longevity. I think there's a question with that later. And that is simply because it contains vitamins and minerals that are known are linked to longevity. Chicken is a great one. Chicken is going to, lean chicken is going to be a great one. It's not going to have a whole bunch of saturated fat. This is going to make sure that we get the appropriate amount of protein in as well. Soy is thought to be great to help reduce menopause symptoms as well, because it has a chemical like estrogen in there as well. It's also going to be effective for reducing breast cancer risk too. Flaxseed too is also associated with being demonstrated to decrease menopause symptoms as well. Oatmeal, we can go on forever, but these are the things that are going to help reduce the symptoms, help to make sure we have healthy muscle mass, low fat mass, and also healthy bones as well. In addition to, he's next to me, so I'm pointing this way, in addition to our exercise.
Okay. Dr. Foster, we got a question in the chat that said, for the salmon recommendation, does that include other high omega-3 fish like trout?
I would say yes to the trout question. Anything that's got your omegas in. Omegas has a very distinct smell to it, so I know when I'm getting my omegas in. And probiotics, how can you get too much of this via yogurt? Is there a certain type of yogurt and certain probiotics? You don't want to eat too much yogurt, depending on what yogurt you eat, because yogurt can be really delicious too. And you don't want to pack on too many calories with it. There are, you can just get your probiotics as well. So I don't know that I have a recommended type. I will send this one to Tiffany Weir, who's in my department. She works on gut microbiota and specifically could recommend great products as far as probiotics are concerned. So yeah, it would probably be tiffany.weir@colostate.edu. And but yeah, get in her inbox and ask her those questions. She can recommend something really great. That's who I go to. Like if I have to take I had to take an antibiotic at one point and I was like, I want to recolonize my gut. And she knew exactly what to recommend.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question is also for you, Dr. Foster. It says, I'm noticing that I am becoming more sensitive to certain foods as I get older, that I can't eat some of the things I once did. Why is this happening?
So this is an area I study, but I study it from a pinch of a different aspect. So in our laboratory with adipose tissue, biology, we've gotten into looking at lymph nodes within adipose tissue as well. And so lymph nodes is a storage area where we're going to be keeping immune cells. So immune cells are going to be a little army. They're waiting to see if there's some sort of noxious stimuli to then create an immune response towards. And they go out and they try to blunt that immune response, keep it where it belongs, and then extinguish it at some point. And so one of the things that we're answering from the obesity aspect, which now can also be linked to aging, is what are the repercussions of obesity? So that's that highly inflammatory state. And long story short, just as our skin may age, just as we may get wrinkles on our face, our immune cells are doing the same thing. And our immune cells, they've been active your whole life. They've been fighting off colds and flu, COVID, whatever it may be. And as we age, we have a bunch of different stressors in our environment. Smoking could be factors. Bad diet can be a factor. Too little exercise can be a factor where these cells then don't function as well. And so then it comes down to becoming more food sensitive. At any given point, within our body, the intestines hold 70% of our immune cells. And that's because the intestines are that first line of defense against the outside and inside environment. So at one point as humans, we had to taste everything. Even babies at this point will put everything in their mouth, and you have to have a really great immune response in order not to get sick from everything that you're placing in your mouth, or to be protected from certain foods that you might not be associated with, or have had, or might be bad enough for somewhere. And so what happens here is that as you age and these cells begin to decline, then you're going to have more sensitivity to certain foods. If you're thinking of allergies in this case, I think this is becoming more sensitive to certain foods. If it's an allergy reaction, this would be the reason why, is because of the aging immune cells in this case. So I hope that answered that question.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to jump to a different question here, and then we'll come back to our lineup. This is for Dr. Long. It says, as I've aged, I find that I'm better with boundaries and only doing things that I want to do. I also notice that my circle of friends is smaller, but I'm content with both of these things. Can you explain how daily experiences and social circles change as we get older?
Yeah, this is an awesome question. So, your experience of having a smaller network, being better at setting boundaries with your social partners, but also being more content and satisfied with your relationships is exactly what we see in terms of age normative changes. So, what I mean by that is earlier I talked about this social convoy model, this idea that we kind of travel through life with this kind of small subset of people, and we go through life together with them. It is the case that we see that if you look at just the quantity of social network partners, this actually decreases across the adult lifespan. And in fact, we start seeing these declines occur starting in our 20s. So we already see that people have smaller networks. And part of this has to do with what we call a pruning process. That is that we start to learn to establish our independence. We start to learn that we don't need to please everybody and get everyone's approval all the time. So we start to learn how to be ourselves in a sense. And we also start to learn to seek out social partners who are okay with that and who accept us for who we are as well. And I think in turn, what's really interesting about that is going back to what Dr. Brothers talked about in terms of stereotypes that we have when we think about aging and the typical older adult, we tend to think of that person as being depressed and lonely and grumpy. We have this, idea of grumpy old men. And in fact, the research doesn't support that. What we see is that people are more content and satisfied with their social relationships as they age. And in fact, that people in their 60s tend to be happier with their relationships than people in their 20s and 30s are. They report more positive relationships, they feel more supported. And I won't go into all the nitty gritty details about that. It's really interesting. But also it's the case that when people feel like they need to establish boundaries, or when they might need to, let's say, bring up a conflictual kind of topic, something that might be an argument in their relationships, people who are older feel that those conversations go a lot better than younger people do. There's a lot less high intensity negative emotions like anger and frustration that occurs in those situations, but it's also the case that the dynamics change as we age too. So very fascinating question. This is one of those areas where we talk a lot about declines, but on the upside, as we age, our social relationships and our emotional experiences actually seem to be one of those things that get better.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Next question is multi-part question, all about fitness. It says, what are the best practices for fitness in the 40s and 50s? I've never been a big exerciser, but I know it's more important for me to be active as I age. What kinds of things should I be concerned about before I start? Is it too late for me to start in my 50s? And then lumped in with that, what physiological changes happen during midlife and how can I combat them with exercise?
Dr. Perry, do you want me to start just real quickly with the, is it too late? And then you can get into the science and the recommendations. Does that sound okay?
I would love if you started.
Okay, so this is a great way to say it's never too late, and that sounds cliche, but it's really, really true. And all the research is showing more and more the plasticity that exercise affords as far as so many things in making aging better as far as cognitive health, physical health, mental health. So yes, absolutely. Start even if you've never done it before. And exercise has been described as the single most important and effective non-pharmacological intervention or strategy for promoting healthy aging. So it can be free, it can be very few side effects, and have tons of positive effects. And even when it's started much later in life, it can be really helpful. There is a stereotype, since I'll get a little bit more on the attitudinal side. And so there's, of course, a stereotype that older people are sedentary. There's the rocking chair and the recliner chair, and that is a stereotype that it would be neat if our upcoming generations could replace and do away with, because it doesn't have to be the case. So I charge all of us with that mission. And maybe I'll just leave you with a tiny bit of inspiration about a person named Ida Keeling. You can Google her. She made I first learned about her from the New York Times, but she made the Today Show rounds and stuff a couple years ago. I look her up every semester because my students do an activity with her in our risk and resilience course. She might sound familiar to some of you. So Ida Keeling is 103 currently, and she started running when she was in her early 60s and has had a really, really lots of really difficult things in her life. And running has gotten her through some really tough heartache and grief and loss, and has contributed to her ability to be resilient and possibly even her longevity as well. So it's never too late. I'm not sure I would want to start in my 60s, but it certainly is possible to be running. But like Dr. Perry said earlier, there's so many options for physical activity that it's easy to find something that suits your interests and that you would look forward to.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Brothers. And going right off of what Allison just mentioned is, yeah, there are a ton of varieties when it comes to exercise. And going off of stereotypes again too, yeah, I think there is a stereotype that older people are more sedentary. So I would also reinforce Alice's charge of not to give into stereotypes, because when it comes to that coin, we have a side of it where we can't control. There are age-related responses, but then the part where we can control, our lifestyle definitely does have an impact on how quickly we actually maintain or decrease certain things like, again, bone and muscle tissue. So yeah, definitely don't give into that stereotype. Keep being active, and I think you'll be surprised exactly how beneficial that is despite the aging process. But to kind of go back to square one that Hannah was listing, which is what are some of the guidelines for people in their 40s and 50s? Thankfully, those guidelines actually are not any different from people in their 20s and 30s. And Deanna, you actually left a message in the chat, and I'm gonna, after I speak, do a good job of taking home the highlights of what I'm about to say and putting in the chat. So if you don't get everything here, I will be sure to list that information. But as far as activity goes, the first big dichotomous thing we normally divide exercise into is the intensity level. Is it moderate or is it vigorous? So when it comes to that, if you are more comfortable doing moderate intensity exercise, it's recommended to do about 150 minutes per week. And yeah, that can include walking. So even if you just do half an hour of walking every day, you would actually exceed that 150 minutes. If you're into the vigorous intensity, because it is more stressful on the body, because you do require to have more time to repair from that or to recover from that, it's only 75 minutes a week. So when it comes to aerobic exercise, 3 to 5 days a week, and again, 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity. I would say the one thing that changes a lot, the things that we really do need to focus on more heavily is as we age, we definitely need to focus more on flexibility training and then also resistance training. So going right back to that spiel about what are the things that change as we age? Well, a lot of things, but when it comes to exercise, one of the things that we're looking at the most is how exercise can impact your percentage of fat tissue, muscle tissue, and bone tissue. Of course, a lot of other things as well when we think about, I don't want to say even cognitive decline, but maybe cognitive sluggishness. We know that exercise has actually been really, really helpful with that. And this would be something more along the lines of what I would talk about more in depth with the hopefully the next panel that we get to 65 and up. But yeah, strength resistance is going to be really, really important at this point. Again, with the cognitive side, with making sure that we're losing the right tissue and maintaining or gaining the proper tissues. And the thing that I said earlier is going back to high intensity exercise, this really is a good thing, but please keep in mind that not everybody is going to be good at this. So kind of again, I think Deanna, you had that specific clause in your question, which is, well, what is the percentage of resistance I should be going for? And if you're starting off, I would definitely recommend that you go for a percentage or a weight where you can do 15 to 20 repetitions of. So if you're thinking about maybe doing a bicep curl, then choose a weight where you feel pretty good doing 15 to 20 repetitions. And then as you ease into that exercise program, it's okay to start increasing the weight, which would mean decreasing the repetitions, but then also increasing the amount of sets that you do as well. But I would say the biggest thing is if you've never exercised before, do yourself two really big favors. One, go ahead and check in with your doctor. You never, especially if you've not seen your doctor in a while, you never know what might be occurring in the system because you may not have had a chance to see what's occurring if you've not stressed your body enough. But when you stress your body, as in the case of exercise, you'll soon find out if there's something that is maybe amiss with your physiological balance. So please check in with your doctor, make sure that everything's on the clear there. Second goal when it comes to exercise, especially if you've never done it before, don't worry about the guidelines. Don't worry about anything else. The only thing you really want to worry about is one, finding something that you do that you love. Again, going back to what Allison said about there being a multitude of varieties of exercise, find the one that you love. Dancing is perfectly acceptable exercise. Walking is, jogging, playing volleyball, all these things are great exercise. It doesn't have to be just the gym and it doesn't have to be just running. So find something that you love. Second thing to do on top of that is just get used to that becoming a habit. Don't worry about whether or not you did an hour here or half an hour there. Just say, did I exercise 4 days this week? Okay, great. I'm just going to keep that going. Then after a month, say, all right, now am I actually doing quality exercise? Am I pushing myself? Then focus on that. But I think that's where a lot of people go too wrong, is they think that they need to be like these perfect fitness machines right when they start. And that's probably one of the worst mentalities to have. Do something regularly and do something that you love. I would definitely say start there. And when you got those, come back and see me. I'll give you the next step.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Perry. We are about out of time. So thank you to our panelists for these amazing answers to all of these questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted a question. We will be having another aging panel. Aging Across the Lifespan is the name of this series. So we'll be having aging for 65 years old and above. That will be in the fall. So if you're interested in keeping up with our events at the Center for Healthy Aging, we will put our email in the chat. You can join our newsletter listserv, or you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CSU Healthy Aging, and that is the best way to get information about all of these events. Again, just thank you so much to our panelists and everybody who attended. I think this was a great discussion, and I look forward to doing it again in the fall.